Good morning. I'm an old dude, and I'm more excited than you. I really count it a distinct honor to share with the class just a little bit that I know and the experience I've had over the last few years as a leader in the inner city, in higher education, in government. I believe some of the lessons that I have learned can be critical in helping you move forward. A lot of what I will talk about will focus on why you do what you do. Because there are a lot of presentations that talk about how. There's a quote by a philosopher that I don't necessarily agree with, but this quote is valid. It says, "A man understands the why of life and answer in how." And that's Nietzsche. I don't necessarily agree with his philosophies, but I do agree with the man that understands the why of life and answer in how. And so we're going to talk a little bit about developing that passion for what your purpose is and what you will do in your life. Now, where's the right place for me to stand? Am I blocking the screen by standing here? This is okay? Okay. Okay, let's go. This is not a sermon, so I'm not going to preach. But since I'm a Christian, my life has been guided by God's word. My mom was a lady who believed in God's word and raised me and my brothers in the word. And this is a scripture that really typifies who I am. By the Apostle Paul says, "Brothers, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise like human standards. Not many of you were influential. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the strong. He chose lowly things of the world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one can boast before him. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God, that is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Let him who boasts, boast in the Lord." So I stand before you today, definitely not the Apostle Paul, but as a person who boasts in the Lord. I am one of those foolish things that God used to confound the wise. And as I tell you a little bit about my background, you'll see why it's very unlikely for me to be standing in front of you and sharing a little bit of my story. I figured I'd tell my story in pictures. You always have to have a funny picture of yourself. You know, the second grade picture. I don't want to show you one in the third grade when I didn't have any teeth. But basically, up in the upper right-hand corner, you see my mother's father, Arto Sr., and Patricia Elaine, and a picture of me. I'm one of 4 brothers. I don't know if any of you all have ever read the birth order book about oldest. I am the oldest. And there's no doubt that I'm the oldest. And I hope my brothers are watching this on YouTube so they can be reminded that I'm the oldest. But no, I'm the oldest of 4 sons, which was a pleasure to be the oldest. And I think it's the beginning of my leadership experience, having to be responsible for 3 younger brothers. But I'm also the oldest of 41 grandchildren. My grandmother had 12 kids, and she's passed away now, but she would always say, when I would walk in the room, "That's number 1." And to the time that she passed away, I mean, and this is honest, you know, God has really blessed me. When she couldn't speak, she was at the end of her life. I was in Ohio, and I went to the rehab center where she was, and the nurse was going to feed her. And I happened to walk up, and I had some business I had to take care of. And I told the nurse, I said, "Let me take the food in." And then I knocked on the door. I said, "Mr. Jones, your food is here." And then I walked in, and she couldn't talk, but she had that look. Her eyes lit up, and then I fed her. That was the last time we were together. And so I say that because that sense of self that my grandmother, who was a praying woman, gave me, so important to reach throughout my story. Father, husband, 2 outstanding sons, a 17-year-old, 15-year-old. Sometimes they think they know more than me. That's okay. You know, they got a little time to find out how much they know. I attended Bowling Green State University, one of America's great universities, BGSU alumni, watching this film. I love Bowling Green. I was on the alumni board. And I'll tell you a little bit how I got to Bowling Green. I'm the president of Frontline Outreach, which is becoming one of America's greatest urban ministries in the inner city of Orlando for the last 45 years. I haven't been there 45 years. I've only been 2 when it got started, but I've been in the last 15. And right now I am a Strong Cities, Strong Communities Fellow for the city of Chester. And the Strong Cities, Strong Communities Fellowship is all about taking distressed cities across the country. It's an initiative out of the White House where they have placed fellows in each of those distressed cities. So you have Fresno, Detroit, Youngstown, Cleveland, Memphis, New Orleans, and Chester. And the fellows, and I'm one of 17, we are assigned to the mayor of the city to work on key projects, which I'll talk about. And this is a picture of the fellows, my colleagues down at the bottom. And Frontline Outreach, I mean, is my third child. I mean, it's my passion, you know, and I'll say a little bit about this in a minute. God planted a vision to me at 19 about getting the kids early. And so I came up with this wild idea of how we could change the inner city by developing leaders starting in preschool. And when I say that, people say, preschool? How do you develop leaders? Well, you develop leaders starting in preschool by helping kids to go to school ready. That was my story. And then you begin to develop the capacity as leaders in middle school, in the character academy, teaching them the character traits of leadership and giving them the opportunity to serve. But then you develop high school leaders who eventually graduate from high school and go on to college, and you provide scholarships for them. And then they graduate, like Rachel Felix and Vincent Kelly. This is my 15th year. My first group of Baptist schoolers are now graduating from college. My first group of preschoolers are now going to college. I thought that I would only be there for 3 years. You know, when you're young, you're supposed to be young, I thought, turn this thing around and I'll get out of there. But it took 15 years for God to do the work that He wanted to do in the lives of His children. But my story is also a story of men and mentors and people and black men and white men and people who didn't believe in God and people who do believe in God. One, my dad, you know, up in the upper right-hand corner, you know, who was not necessarily a strong Christian, but a hard worker. You know, his favorite saying was, oatmeal is better than no meal. And one monkey doesn't stop the circus. You know, I remember when he died a few years ago and I preached his funeral, I gave all of his Artoisms. Then it's his brother, that's a bad picture, my Uncle Eddie, who lived in Philadelphia in the Mount Airy neighborhood, who every summer I stayed with him. And he taught me a lot of key lessons. You know, he was not the oldest, but he's like the third oldest. He brought my father and my grandmother and different other ones from Mississippi. They grew up in rural Mississippi. Mound Bayou, Mississippi. You probably will never hear of Mound Bayou, Mississippi, I'll tell you. But Mound Bayou, Mississippi. And he brought them up to Toledo, Ohio. And he would teach me critical lessons as a kid. Chief, know yourself, love yourself, take care of yourself. So important to have men in your life to teach you those things. But then there was Clarence Terry, who was my mentor when I had to work 3 jobs when I was in school. And I worked as a tour guide, and I worked as a student recruiter. And so, however I could make money is, you know, minimum wage was $3.35 back then, so that tells you how long it was. You can go. However I could get hours, I would get it. And he introduced me to Paul Olstamp, who was not a believer, but he was the president of the university. And we began recruiting students in Detroit and Cleveland and Columbus. And he said, kid, you have some potential. I'm going to help you go to grad school and we'll create a job for you. And the job was assistant to the vice president for university relations. And he wasn't a believer. But God utilized his power and his influence to further his purpose. Then there were pastors in my life, Pastor Terry Cook and then Willie Mitchell in Dayton, Ohio, who created a nonprofit ministry called Project Impact, where the church fully funded this nonprofit from tithes and offering. They didn't use any outside dollars. That was the first model that I saw that you could really make a difference in your city through the church. With Pastor Dennis Butts, who's been a mentor to me since my early 20s. Then the brothers, the coach of the New Orleans Hornets, Monty Williams, is a good friend and a brother and a prayer partner that has strengthened me. And then the man who recruited me, or as I tell them, they suckered me into coming to Frontline 15 years ago, Ralph Merriman and Arto Woodley. And so all of those men had an impact on all the young men and young leaders we developed. And that's this picture of some of the young men that we had the other year. Frontline Outreach, and we talk a little bit about my work before I go more into why I do it. One of the biggest things that you will see in whether it's the city of Chester or whether it's Frontline Outreach or the city of Orlando is what I call disempowerment of people who are poor. There's a quote that says it's expensive to be poor. That people who are poor, whether they be in any inner city across America, and we can also include rural areas, feel like they're powerless. Feel like there's nothing they can do about their circumstances. Feel like they can never make enough money to meet their needs. And typically ministries and government programs and philanthropic programs really don't do a lot about that issue. They do provide bread, they provide resources, shoes, but they don't deal with the essential need that people have to live beyond survival, to thrive. Zig Ziglar, who I think just passed away, had a quote that said, our real job is not to give others our riches, but it's to reveal theirs. And so when I look at the work that I do in Orlando, as well as beginning to do in Chester, as a Christian, our job is not to give people things. Our job is to help them to realize what God has already given them, and in faith, take those things and move with them. That's my story. You've seen my story. I didn't go into it in Bowling Green. They should not have even let me into school. I didn't even have a housing deposit. I argued to get my key to my dorm. I owed the bursar's office over $2,000, and I should have had Joe Martin's picture of it. We debated back and forth, and out of that argument came a job. He said, you owe us $2,000. I see you have a car, why don't you sell it? I said, I still owe you $1,950. Why don't you have a job? I said, because I haven't found one. He said, I'll let you stay here if you work and give all the checks back. And I did that from October to January. So I should not have ever been there. But there are people along the way, and God used those people to give me opportunities. That's part of what we should be doing when we're in ministry, whether it's overseas, whether it's in the inner city, whether it's in the rural area, is helping people to recognize the gifts that God has already planted in them. Because if we don't do that, to be honest with you, if we don't do that, is it really about us, or is it about them? And a lot of times in ministries, we feel like we're doing good work, and we're not really honest with ourselves about that. So when you talk about passion for your purpose, why you do what you do, we can talk a lot about the how, and I want you to ask me specific questions about what I do as a fellow in the city of Chester in terms of developing capacity for faith, the faith community, and helping the city develop this capacity, grant capacity, and what I do in the inner city of Orlando. But I want to talk a little bit about why, because there are a lot of people that talk about how. So having a passion, passion implies excitement, enthusiasm for life. It's life. What's the purpose? Purpose really implies that you have some type of goal, a target or calling or ultimate why to life. And so the greatest question that you will ever have to answer as leaders around the world is, why are you doing what you're doing? Because let me tell you, and I know this is on video, so I'll sanitize what I'm going to say. To be honest with you, as a leader, you're going to deal with some blows in your life. You're going to deal with some difficulties and some failures. And the only thing that's going to carry you is your faith in that overwhelming call. If you don't have it, if you're not sure, you'll quit. I've been in a number of leadership initiatives, the Bank of America Neighborhood Builders, the DeVos Urban Leadership Initiative, Leadership Orlando, LifeWorks Leadership. I've been in a number of national and local leadership. I'm leadership now. I've done probably every leadership training you can do. But I can tell you, in looking at those various groups that I've been in, a lot of the people who are in those groups don't stay long. Or you see them 5 or 6 years later, they're not in ministry, they're not doing that work. They've stepped out. And why? They lost heart. Or they go into another field because they didn't know, they weren't sure of whether they really should be doing that work. You have to marry passion and purpose to really know why you're doing what you're doing. The reason why I've been here for 15 years. So purpose / calling is the truth that God calls us to himself so decisively that everything we are, everything we do, and everything we have is invested with special devotion and dynamism and lived out as a response to his sons. Anybody familiar with Os Guinness? You want to read his book, The Call, Finding and Fulfilling Your Life's Essential Purpose. I started to give you a bibliography, and I felt like it felt too much like a class, so I didn't want to give you a bibliography of books. But The Call is a great book because, and this is one of the central quotes, everything you do, everything you are, everything you have should be given with special devotion and dynamism to really live out God's purpose. That's why I'm here. Because when I think about, there's a song, I grew up Pentecostal, so I'll throw some Pentecostal, sprinkle some Pentecostalism in there. And there's a song that we used to sing when I think of the goodness of Jesus and all that he's done for me. My soul cries out, hallelujah, thank God for saving me. When I think of God's goodness and where I come from, my father was a mechanic. My mother worked in a factory. My father has a GED from the Army. Nobody had ever gone to college. He had 14 people in his family. My mother had 12 people in her family. I'm the oldest of 41. And to get from naively 1558 Nebraska and Toledo, Ohio to college with $25 and a car that wasn't really, I think it was probably worth $49.50. Not really worth that much. To get from there to here, that's God. I mean, that's him. I mean, you can't make that story up. And so, when we understand that God has placed us where he's placed us for a specific reason and call and a specific job to do, then we have to live our lives out. So what does God say about it? John 15 and 16 says, you were chosen and appointed to bear fruit. You're supposed to be fruit bearers. A tree is known by its fruit. You're not just supposed to look for a job. I'm sorry, all monster.com and all of those websites. You're more than a job. Don't ever think, and I tell young people this all the time, don't ever think it's about you finding a job. I will tell you, you have to chase purpose. Chase purpose and you'll never look for a job. Every position I've had, and this is honest, you can look it up, look my resume, call people. I didn't have to apply for it. The first one was created by Dr. Osgap. The second one was a created job. I met the president, who's now the president, Widener, who recruited me down. The third one is he was leaving Wright State and went to another university. They had a position. They called me, said, "You're interested in this position." The fourth one was the same way. Frontline, I didn't apply for. Actually, they didn't want to come to Florida. That's a whole other story. But it's living out the purpose, walking out those steps that God calls us to. Matthew 5:13 through 14. You are the salt and light of the world. Wherever you work in the world, whatever you do, you may be the only Jesus that people see. That's a huge burden, but it's a great opportunity. Can you represent the Lord well? Now let me tell you, give a disclaimer. You are not going to be perfect. I know I am, but you can't be perfect. No, you're not going to be perfect, and trust me, I'm not even as good as you are. You will blow it. But your difficulty, your disappointment does not deter God's purpose in your life. Third, Jeremiah 29:11, we all know that God has a plan for your life that proves you having hope and prosperity. Next slide. This is a quote by Bill Hybels. Anybody know who Bill Hybels is? Pastor Willow Creek, one of the largest churches in the country. He says, how long has it been since you fell on your knees and worshiped God for the fact that He's given you a flaming purpose to orient your life? And this is where we will do a little audience participation. You ever think about that? Anybody ever think about that? That God's given you a flaming purpose. When's the last time you thanked God for the purpose that He gave you? Anybody? Just raise your hand. Nod, raise your hand. Anybody in here? Okay, all right. Because think about it this way. There are millions of people, maybe even billions, that don't know what they're supposed to do. They wake up every day not sure. And part of your job as ministry leaders as you go out is to help people rediscover that purpose by connecting them to God, the fact that He created them, and helping them to know that yes, they are special. Yes, they do have a purpose in whatever ministry area that you determine your work in. As Hybels said, that you're chosen by God. Every leader is chosen by God. It's a vision by God, equipped by God, empowered by God, and rewarded by God. If you can remember that this all comes back to the fact that He put you and placed you where you are. That's it. So, as we round out and end with this list and a quote, a couple quotes. Since leadership is key to me, when you talk about the inner city of Chester, or the inner city of Orlando, or the inner city of Toledo, Ohio, where I'm from, the Glass City, shout out to Glass City, that it all really comes down to leadership. Detroit, where we have fellows, it comes down to leadership. Every city rises and falls on how its leaders see the city. And I'll say this for even in Orlando, because I was on the chamber board and I've been involved in a lot of different initiatives across the city. I would say it rises and falls on how the Christian leaders respond to circumstances. I'll give you an example, which is not, I don't think it's confidential. A few years back, Orlando had the Community Venues Project, where they wanted to package 3 projects into one. They wanted to renovate the Citrus Bowl. Everybody knows the Citrus Bowl. They have all the big bowl games. They wanted to build a new arena, basketball arena for the Magic, and they wanted to build an art center. $1.8 billion of money. And in our community impact study, it said, I immediately went to community impact. It said that the community impact would be that the people in that community might get jobs, which meant they wouldn't get jobs because there was no plan. So I immediately raised the alarm and said, what's up? You have people who live within a mile of these venues where we're going to spend almost $2 billion and there's no opportunity for them. And nobody really wanted to deal with it. I won't name names or drop names. They really didn't want to deal with it. And I approached a number of people and said, hey, what are we going to do about this? We wonder why young people are angry. Well, tell you the truth, I would be mad. Arena, nice arena. I'm walking by the arena, I'm seeing the last year the NBA All-Star game, and I don't have a chance to get engaged. I don't have a chance to build a business in that area. Art center, state-of-the-art art center being built. Citrus Bowl, I'm seeing all these things come on, all this money coming to my community, but I'm barely surviving. Wow. And so, approached a number of leaders and said, hey, what are we going to do about this? And approached a particular leader, political leader, which I won't say who, and I said, you know what, guess what? You don't have to have a plan. I have a plan. Called community reinvestment. You can slap your name on it and say it's your plan. I said, this is what we should do. $1.8 billion. We asked all the companies that participate in this project to give 1% back. And you give it to the community foundation. And that 1% equals about $10 million. They get a gift credit for it, and they get a tax credit for it. And that $10 million could be invested and endowed and use the interest of that $10 million to provide scholarships for inner city kids, grants for sustainable families, or sustainable family programs, and home ownership. And that would be, interest off of $10 million in perpetuity. How much of a difference would that make? Huge amount of difference. But when we talk about leaders and leadership, none of the leaders had the heart to step up. And where were the Christian leaders to say, we have to do what's right for the people who are in this community? So I believe that every community rises and falls on leadership. And if those Christian leaders have the integrity of heart to challenge the status quo and to challenge the political and the community leadership to step up. So here are 10 things that I think every leader should know. It's not like David Letterman's top 10, but better. One, you got to know God and know your purpose. Essential. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. You got to know where you're going. Two, you have to know how to dream. Now, there's a value of dreaming. There's a book called Leadership is an Art. Has anyone read that? Added to the bibliography. We'll test it with 5 days. Leadership is an Art by Max Dupree. And he says that the first job of a leader is to define reality. The second job is to say thank you. Every leader has to have the ability to dream. Because if you don't have a dream, what does the word say? Without a vision, the people perish. You have to tap into the vision that God has and be able to dream about that. You have to have a system of values. Our system of values should be God's word. And you have to be, and it's popular now to say servant leaders. You have to be able to serve. Oh my goodness. I can't even overemphasize on so many leaders now are so me. They're waiting to get to the corner office. They're waiting to get, the parking spot. That was one of the big things for me when I came to Frontline. When I came, and I'm not putting anybody out there, but there were assigned parking spots for certain people. What? I got rid of all of that. All our guests park up front, and then everybody else gets a spot off to the side. It should be about serving people. You have to know how to serve. If you don't know how to serve people, you probably shouldn't think about it. You have to be accountable. You have to have, as they say, you have to have an apostle Paul in your life. You have to have a mentor. You have to have a Barnabas. You have to have a brother or sister for you ladies. You have to have a Timothy, somebody you bring along. You have to have all 3 of those levels. Somebody you look up to, somebody you walk with, somebody you bring along. And you have to be able to make them leaders. That's that whole fruit thing. Fortunately, I can claim Ashley. Can I claim you today, Ashley? Okay. I can claim Ashley today. When she's big, she won't remember. But I can claim it today. But her and all of the young leaders that have been taught and in some small way have been developed. I don't take any credit, it's really God's word. And you have to be willing to fail. We don't talk about this. All of our success literature, nothing talks about failing. I think John Maxwell has the book Failing Forward, but most things don't talk about failing. But the truth of the matter is, what's that quote? Show me a man who hasn't made a mistake, and I'll show you somebody who's not working. If you're really working and doing anything, you're going to make mistakes. The key is not whether you make mistakes. The question is whether you recover. And you have to be able to build shared vision. And this, I think this is where sometimes leaders, and I may have failed in this area, because you can be so driven, and you know what it should be, but you have to bring people along. And I don't know how much work you all have done on shared vision, but there's a book, anybody familiar with systems thinking? Government system. Another book I'll give you books for Ashley. But it talks about, Peter Singh talks about shared vision, developing a shared vision. How do you develop shared vision? How do you create that community conversation? That's part of what we're trying to do in Chester. Is not imposing a vision on them, but allowing them to develop a vision of what they want to be, and then we just facilitate that conversation. Ashley knows this one because I use it all the time. Win-win. How do you create partnership? See, most people do think that if, what's your name, sir? Minyanga. If Minyanga wins, I lose. But I try to turn that paradigm on its head. If I help Minyanga win, I win. It's a different paradigm. And Ashley knows from the time that we've worked together, I always, in the partnerships that we developed as a nonprofit ministry with businesses and corporations and governmental entities, I'm always looking for the win for them, because if they win and I help them win, guess what? They're going to come back to us. But if I only try to get what I can get from them, I might win in the short run, but in the long term I lose. And you have to embrace change. The only thing that stays the same is change. Life is all about changing. And so often we, and particularly I'm this type of person too, we get into a good pattern. Oh man, it's great right now. Everything is going good. I don't want to change anything. And all of a sudden you have something happen. And you have to change. But you don't want to change because I just got it the way I wanted it to work. Life is all about changing. All about new opportunities. Your vocation, calling, purpose is what makes you more you. Think about it. Your vocation is what makes you more you. That's why finding out what it is so important. So the thing I'll leave you with before we do questions, when you think about what you do and where you want to go and how you want to do it, and when we take questions, I want you to tell me a little bit about where you think you're going overseas and why you think you might do that. When you introduce yourself and ask your question, you tell me a little bit about that. But who you are, what are you living for? Really, when it comes down to it, what are you really living for? And the bottom line is, what will you sacrifice to get that goal? I was in a session with John Maxwell, and it was a small group like this, and I was privileged to be there. And he said something that I had never heard before, but it's very true. He said, every leader and his or her people has to sacrifice something to go to the next level. He said, what will you give up? And I thought that was so profound. I was like, wow. What are you going to sacrifice to go to the next level? So the question for you, when you think about that question is, okay, you're at this point. What are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to give up to go to the next level? Next level. Passion for your purpose means getting excited that everything you are, everything you do, everything you have is invested to bring glory to the great and awesome God who has especially created you for His service. I'm going to end with this, and I think I may have put it up. I'm going to end with this quote from a book by T.D. Jakes that I shared with our team. It was very, very powerful. And it talks about passion for your purpose. And now I'll take questions. He says it's lethal when you're surrounded by people who have an attitude of indifference about the goal that you laid down for your life. Who you surround yourself with is very important. There are some issues that can be corrected through teaching and leadership, but you cannot teach someone to care. The person who does not have a passion for your purpose is in the wrong place. They will destroy the workplace, ruin productivity, and hinder the rhythm of your company with complaining and murmuring. In marriage, they're like strychnine. In friendship, they're constantly dissatisfied. How can you tell someone shares your dreams, goals, and hopes for the future? I look at that twinkle in your eye when we discuss the focus of our relationship. That twinkle in your eye is the unmistakable passion that ignites the soul and keeps you ablaze. The motivation has to be more than money in a business transaction. It has to be more than sex or status or financial gain in marriage. Look for that spark of passion simmering within. Not just the initial burst of enthusiasm that could be feigned. Never walk with anyone who has no passion for the things that you're going to do together. Your basic purpose has to be the same, or your progress will be impeded. Can two walk together unless they be agreed? Amos 3:3. This rhetorical question in the book of Amos suggests the obvious answer is no. It makes me think of a brigade of men marching in their uniforms and stepping proudly in synchronized method. They are many feet, but they sound like one, because they are not only outwardly uniform, but they're inwardly synchronized. Imagine now as they step in precise manner. If one of them is out of step, it ruins the presentation of the whole brigade. They break the rhythm and the cycle of movement by stepping out of the adopted rhythm of the other man. You've seen it on the job, in marriage, and in many areas of life. We must say goodbye to the kinds of people and seek out others who hear the same tune we hear. And while they may play different instruments, they share our temple. And I think I'll leave you with that because it's very powerful. A big part of it, I didn't make it one of my top 10, is you have to surround yourself with the right people. Not only should you have a passion for things, but you also have to have people around you that share that passion. And not just get excited about the results, but being excited about you and the work you do. I thank you so much for your time, and I will open it up for questions. And remember, just tell me who you are and what you think you want to do overseas, and then you can ask your questions about the details of what I do with the Strong Cities, Strong Communities piece, or as the president of Frontline, or my work in higher education. Any of those things are open. Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
My name's Adam. I'm in the private side of exporting
Okay.
stuff like that. You mentioned something about training up leaders, identifying characteristics, things like that. People where they're going to be good on this. Is that largely intuition, or is there a methodology that you use to pick out things and just to put people in the right places?
Great question. First name is David, right? Adam. I'm sorry. Adam, and you're working in exporting, or that's on the private side of exporting. And you want to know if there's a methodology for choosing leaders to develop them.
Yeah.
Okay. I got that right. I don't know why I missed your name. You just got it right. Probably because David is right here. Adam, a couple of different things. One, with young leaders, I believe that they all have the capacity to lead. And so what we try to do is develop their capacity to lead and then help them to find their purposes. Now, when we say that all of them have the capacity to lead, it doesn't mean that they will all be political leaders or ministry leaders or even in higher education. They will all be fathers or mothers. They all lead in some form. My job in Orlando is to develop their capacity. Now, we do some surveying and skills training to develop that leadership ability. Like in our leadership academy, we developed a tool with one of our partners to develop these young people's ability to job shadow and to lead and serve. And we use 3 character traits that we assess them on: interpersonal effectiveness, applied problem solving, and accountability. So I believe in assessment and tools. I was just telling your professor, I didn't think that I was an assessment person when I was coming out of grad school initially, but I realized that you have to spend time and really assessing where people are and then helping them to get, and particularly using skills training to move to the next level. I think there's another question within your question that is very important. When you are in an indigenous situation, how do you really select leadership, and how do you know what leadership is really qualified to lead or not? Let me tell you one of my huge mistakes. I went in as a person with some skills, and I thought, I don't want anybody to feel bad, so I don't put my degrees on the wall, I don't talk about my skill set, and I'm just going to train. I just believe so much in my ability to train that I would train people to lead. And I learned what I just read. You have to find that passion, because you can invest as much skills training and training and opportunities and development in a person, but if they're not passionate about it, it won't stick. And so I'm learning at the right young age of 47, you have to know when that investment is not going to bear fruit, and you have to move on to people who really is serious about doing it. So I do believe in skills assessment, and I believe now that I'm a little bit older, that particularly when you're going to have people working around you, you should be heavy on the assessment side. Assessment and as well as evaluation. Because otherwise, people can tell you, yes, I really want to lead, but you have to look at how they're developing and progressing. Otherwise, you'll be wasting your time.
Elaborate a little more on those 3 assessments.
The character traits we use.
Yeah, why you chose those 3.
Okay. The question is, why do we use the 3 character traits we use for our high school leaders? Applied problem solving, interpersonal effectiveness, and accountability. The company that we worked with had an assessment that used 9 tools. I mean, they had probably 9 pieces. I distilled them down to the 3 that I thought were most important for entry-level workers. Everybody wants a problem solver. If you can solve a problem, you'll never look for a position. Everybody wants somebody who can come in and get it done. The other thing is everybody wants someone who's accountable. People who show up on time, dependable, and all those other skills. But then you want to not only have applied problem solving and accountability, you have to have interpersonal effectiveness. And I don't, no disrespect to anybody who's under 30. Love you all. But, the under 30 age, everybody's. I texted Ashley, I told her. No, you didn't tell her. Everybody wants people to talk to people, and then the text and the email is a follow-up. See, I'm an old guy. We used to send memos and type them out and sign them, and went through inter-office mail. Interpersonal effectiveness is important for the younger generation. When you can find people who are effective with people, they're accountable, and they can solve problems, those people are effective across the way. So I thought out of the 9 factors that they had, that those 3 would be the most important in terms of the young people that we work with in the inner city. If they could develop their capacity to be problem solvers, accountable, and in-person effective, it would be it. So it was I shouldn't say an arbitrary choice, but it was a subjective choice on my behalf. Great questions. Other questions? I know I didn't do that good of a job. Oh, I guess I did do it.
I'm Sarah.
Sarah.
My vision is still forming for really walking into exact purpose. But I'm curious, you said you've been in Frontline for about 15 years.
Yes, ma'am.
you purpose to stay abreast with how a community is changing and how the needs are changing, and how you assess that so that you can keep responding across, like, I mean, I'm sure generational differences at a certain point start to change what the needs of the community are. So I'm just curious how you assess that change.
Sarah, great question from Sarah. She wanted to know, over the 15 years, how do we stay abreast to communal changes, and how do we assess those changes? Is that right?
Yes, thank you.
That is an area we're weak in. I won't sit up here and act like we got it right. When I came initially, I went on the vision of believe God had given me, and one of the things was to focus on early childhood education. This was before No Child Left Behind, before President Obama said we should have universal preschool. It's just something that God put in my heart, and as it's been borne out, it was true. Now everybody's talking about early childhood, and so 15 years later, well, early childhood and leadership, because no one was talking about leadership. Nobody talked about the value of developing leaders. 15 years later, we've tweaked both of those models. You know, we did a world-class pre-K plan, so we did some research internally. We have a copyrighted plan, and it is copyrighted. But you can see what are the current trends in early childhood, how does that apply to the urban setting. From a leadership standpoint, you know, we really just drew on the literature at large. And looking at the state of leadership in that area, we're surrounded by almost 2,000 housing units, you know, including public housing, so it's a highly dense area with 2 public grade schools. And but you have the same city council people for years because nobody does anything. So that's the extent of our assessment. One of the things that I think that we are going to get into is to more mobilization of our parents and getting them into education advocacy. Because, you know, when you get older like I am, you begin thinking about, okay, what's going to be sustained beyond you? And so one of the big things that I'm thinking about is, I don't like the word empowering. I'm sorry, that's just my own personal pet peeve. I can't empower Ashley. That would imply that I'm superior to her and I give her power. The Holy Spirit gives you power. You know, all I do is open up opportunities for you. So I don't empower you, but I believe with these parents, our goal is to help them develop, as we develop this educational advocacy piece, to help them understand what's available so that they can begin to take the power in their own community, take their rightful place as parents and leaders. And so, you know, we've done that cursory research. Now we want to be more, you know, ground level community engagement, so the parents themselves are doing the leading. Because I think people look to me, you know, Mr. Woodley, to lead, and I'm just a man. And so it's really about disseminating that. But that's a great question, sir. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm Nishan.
Nishan, okay.
And my interest is in product design.
Okay, product design.
I was just curious in terms of what projects you're working on in Chester, some of the challenges that you face, and what your vision is for that community.
Great question. Nishan, right? You're interested in, well, you're in product design, and you're interested in the challenges and opportunities that are faced in Chester. Well,
Arto?
yes, sir.
You want to turn off
No, you can keep it up. I'm not going to say anything that's not true. I would say that the challenges and the opportunities, and I don't believe I'll get in trouble with any of my superiors, are the challenges you see in every inner city. It distills down to leadership. And as I always say, you know, because Chester has struggled from a school district standpoint, you know, their school district is one of the worst school districts, and that's documented. They've struggled with a governance standpoint. They've struggled with the numbers of kids who graduated from high school and the incarceration rates. But I tell people in Chester, that's not the struggle. The struggle is leadership. What happens in the home? What happens in city government? Those things all have an impact on what happens. And I asked this question to a group at Wyoming University. Does anybody in here know what, you know it, so I'll answer the question. You've heard this before. what is the average reading level of someone who's in jail, incarcerated in the U.S.? What's the average reading level? What would you think?
I like third
Who's
grade.
saying what?
Third grade.
Third grade, okay.
Oh, third grade.
Third grade, okay. Somebody else?
I said fourth grade, but yeah.
Right. This is an educated group. Most people don't know. It is fourth grade. Fourth grade. And did you know, this is answering your question, Michelle. Did you know that jail growth is based on third grade reading scores? So jail growth is predicted on third grade reading scores. So here's the deal. If we know that, shouldn't we be putting a heavy emphasis on preschool and making sure the kids go to school ready and making sure they read beyond the third grade? And Ashley knows this because she used to help recruit volunteers for this ministry. Read and Succeed. Read and Succeed is an easy ministry. One-on-one reading, mentoring, 1 day a week, 1 hour a week. We give kids a snack. Most of the kids come from the snack, but they end up reading anyway. We pre-test and post-test the kids. Most of the kids end up reading, 80% of the kids end up reading at grade level or above. That's keeping kids out of jail. Because if they read at least on the 5th grade level, guess what? They're going to go through high school. If they get on the high school level, they're going to college. Simple thing. But it takes leadership to say, see, a lot of the conversations I have in town are focused on the symptoms. And they don't get to the root of the issue. And so you have to be able to, from a systematic standpoint, and you all are all smart people, MBAs and MAs, when you're dealing with issues, it's not just the issue that's presented to you. You know, when people talk about Chester, they talk about all of these problems. Well, when I came to Frontline in the inner city of Orlando, it was the same thing. You know, the first thing I got at Frontline was from the team, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, we don't have enough money for this, we don't have enough money for that, we can't move forward on this, we can't move forward on that. I said, stop. This place is dirty, the bleaching water is cheap, let's clean this joint up. And we started with cleaning up the place, and guess what, and I'm serious, that sounds simplistic. We cleaned up and people began to come in and say, wow, this is a different place in here. What are you doing in here? And lo and behold, we were able to get contractors to come in, and we've, as Ashley knows, totally go on YouTube. I know this will be on YouTube. Go on YouTube and look at the evolution of Frontline Outreach. You can look at how it looked 15 years ago and how it looks now. And it all started with cleaning up. So in Chester, same thing. It might just start with reading. But we have to find those critical skills that need to happen in the community. For the community has to be good. The city government, the school district, all of the civil society pieces are only as strong as families, as churches, as communities. If communities are fractured, if families are fractured, guess what? That's what you have. And that's not just Chester. That's Toledo, Ohio. That's Detroit, Michigan. That's it. Every rural is a little bit different, but rural and urban area. It's because you have the breakdown of civil society. And that's some of you may have had classes dealing with the whole building of civil society. So I think in Chester there are great opportunities. The question is, for me, whether I have enough time to pursue them all. I don't know. The fellowship is 2 years, and to tell you a little bit more about the fellowship, since you asked, it's out of the White House through HUD, Housing and Urban Development, but it's privately funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. So we are, as fellows, 17 fellows, are paid for by private dollars, so we're not government people, so we just say what we think. And we have a 2-year period to do it, and then we meet in every city, so we can look at the challenges of those cities, and then we do some a management academy every quarter. But I think Chester's a place of great opportunity, and we have great opportunities to move forward. It just depends on how effective we are in building the community. Other questions? Any others? Yes, sir.
Could I build off on that?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Only one question. David told me one question limit. No, I'm just kidding. Sean, go ahead.
I mean, the read and succeed, that sounds like, it makes sense to, I'm assuming to most of us here, but how do you correlate that as a true cause and effect in terms of reading and succeeding? I mean, you've been in working in this area for 15 years. what are some of the, like, do you have long-term proof or stuff like that to show that, hey, this is actually correlated?
Okay, great question. Deshaun's question is, read and succeed makes sense, but how do you know that it has long-term impact based on the work that we do? How I correlate it, we don't have longitudinal data. I mean, I know enough about research to be able to not stand here and pontificate and tell you that we have done a longitudinal study. But we have anecdotal information in terms of our leadership students who go on to college. The goal, our model is preschool, after school, middle school leadership, and high school leadership. So it's a pyramid. It's not a Ponzi scheme. It's a pyramid. And so the goal is to take kids to grow up with them. And so our kids who graduate from our leadership pieces, Leadership Academy, Urban All-American, at least 75 to 80% go on to college. We have 45 in colleges around the country. And so many of those kids, when I track back, many of those kids were not kids that just came to us in high school. They started either in grade school or in Read and Succeed. And so when kids read, well, actually, I am proof that it works. I'm the embodiment of that idea. When Paul Olskamp, president of Bowling Green, we were coming from Detroit, and he was upset that he was not getting more Black and Latino kids to come to Bowling Green, which is a kind of rural school, south of Toledo, Ohio. He said, why aren't we getting more kids here? I'd never thought about it, and then I thought, well, he said, how did you get here? Learned to read early, had a chance to lead, a sense of God's purpose early, came from a big supportive family. And so I realized that if we're going to develop young people, it has to start early. It has to be based on some academic competence, and the one academic skill that's a predictor of future success is the ability to read and communicate. And so, based on my experience, I've extrapolated that into this ministry, and we have a number of young people who have gone on, graduated from college. One who's going to school at White Law School. One who's going, she just put on her Facebook page, she's going to Howard Medical next year. She was the first class of Read and Succeed students. So that thirst for learning, there's no magic to it. That thirst, when you ignite that spark in a kid, they move forward. There's a quote by Yeats that said, education isn't the filling of a pail, it's the lighting of a fire. And so our job is to ignite that spark. And then once, it goes into a flame, they go in all sorts of directions. But, so that's the proof that we have that reading is very valuable. A great follow-up question, Sean. Any other questions? Oh, time?
Great. No, you still have plenty of time.
Okay. What's your name?
I'm Hannah. I'm interested in microfinance. But my question is...
Hold on. I'll go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. My question is, you talked, I think one of the previous slides about creating a shared vision for the community. I know at times organizations, agendas and communities' needs and what they assess in their agendas can be different. So I was just wondering if you could talk to how you practically kind of move towards creating a shared vision and reconciling the differences.
So your name's Hannah, right? You're interested in microfinance, and you want to know how can you create shared vision on a practical level with the community, because organizations and communities many times conflict on shared vision. Great question. From my standpoint, what I am trying to do, since I've been in this ministry half of my life, I should say half of my life, a third of my life, is to really try to create the conversation with the people who will benefit from it at the front end, rather than coming up and saying, I know what's good for you people. Just listen to me and follow what us. People never do that, and particularly people in the inner city, and particularly, and no one's on tape, but I'm going to say it anyway, particularly black folk. We don't like folk to tell us what to do. I mean, we just don't, And so we have to be part of the process. And so what I try to do, and like we're expanding our early childhood piece. Well, in the past we would have gone out and hired people to, get the word out. No, at Christmas, at our community Christmas ministry, we asked all the parents who were benefiting from community Christmases and our volunteers, who wants to be involved in helping us do that? And so we created a group with a parent, with a former parent, well I should say former parent, current parent, who has gone up professional races. She's going to coordinate those parents, and they will get the word out about who we are, what we do. We'll give everybody shirts, and it's theirs. And so my sense of shared vision is really making it the people, making it theirs, and then bringing my expertise and skill along with theirs to help it get a little bit better, rather than me enforcing a vision top down. Because ultimately, whether it's ministry, business, or anything else, it's about the community. It's theirs. And I think that's part of the challenge. People forget that we're there to serve them. They're not there for us to get what we need to get. And that's an issue that I see in Chester in a lot of instances. There are millions and billions of dollars being made on the backs of poor people. And you might say, how is that? You have all of these entities that say they're doing work for folk across the country and across the world, and how much of that money really benefits the people they're supposed to be helping. Microfinance is a great tool to get the money to the people. But a lot of times, you have these projects where people are saying, look at what we're doing in this country or this inner city. And it happens in Chester all the time. People come in and see the circumstances that are there. They'll write a grant. We're in this project, the money stays with them and it never gets to the community. I'm all about the community, the money hitting the community. And Ashley knows this. And I'll use the example of, you didn't ask this question, but this is a indirect way to answer your question about shared vision. The state of Florida a few years ago, before Ashley came, said they wanted to do a work program for kids. Essentially, they wanted to pay kids, pay us to babysit kids and give them a check. And I told the governor at that time, office, we don't do work programs. We develop leaders. And so we developed the tools that I told you about. They said, well, if you had $400,000, what would you do? I said, well, here's what we do. We develop leadership and service, workplace readiness, resume writing, cover letter, interviewing skills assessment. Great expectations, where kids prepare for their financial future, they buy stock, they put together a budget, they travel to colleges, they fill out college applications, they fill out scholarship forms so they can understand it. And then they the best job shadow with the companies that support the ministry. And everybody back on this end, to end leadership and service, you have to do an I Believe video. You can go on YouTube and see some of the I Believe videos. Every leader, even though it was a state-funded project, that we couldn't make them, we couldn't have an altar call, but we know every leader has to have values, so they did value clarification. Well, out of that, and this is shared vision, the first year I hired a whole group of adults because the state said, we love that idea. We'll give you the money, $300,000. Can you do it in 2 weeks? And I said, yeah. Ashley goes, yeah, we can do it in 1. And I turned it on its head the last few years. Rather than hiring adults who were looking for jobs in the summertime, by the last year, it was a core of 15 student leaders. The council, they led it. Senior director, director of human resources, director of operations, director of communications. So you have 15 high school students, 16 to 18. They got a few dollars more. They ran the program. They did all the discipline. They were harder on the kids than I was. About the uniforms and the time clocks and all that. But all of those young people were at the end of college now. And I told them what they are learning here, they will go to college and they'll be on a whole other level. They're at Florida and South Florida and other schools. And so shared vision, what I ended up doing was taking a project that the state wanted to just be a work project and you keep kids busy, and I turned it into something where the kids were actually, there's a leadership academy, where they're actually, it's theirs. And the only money that went to adults were to the few, the people in our team that supported it. Most of the money went to the kids. that's how I see it. I just believe that if you're doing something for the community, it should go back into the community. All of those kids had to have bank accounts. So you had to have a bank account. You could not go to a check cashing place. I didn't want any, well, anyway, we didn't even do checks because we did them electronically. So if you didn't have a bank account, you couldn't get in. You had to have your state ID. You had to have all your paperwork in place. And we had a conference, and then everybody had to take their test initially, and the top people became the council, and you had to have a minimal score to get in. And these young people ran it. And I still have that model. The state stopped funding it because they changed how they did this. But I will give private dollars to do that, because that model works. When people own it, it's theirs. All you have to do is get out of the way. All I did was meet with them. I met with the students every day. At the beginning of the day, to talk about what we're going to do, and at the end of the day, to assess the day. And some of them said, "Man, that's the hardest I ever worked in my life." I said, "No, it's not as hard as you will work, but it's setting you up." So when you talk about shared vision, that's really my view. It's making it theirs. Adam, you had a question.
I was gonna.
Adam, better known as Dave.
I was thinking about community and education. A lot of times you have situations where you get kids that get good educations and then they move off to other communities, other cities. Have you noticed that sort of brain drain in the leadership students, or is there some way that you've managed to address that?
Adam asked the age-old question about brain drain. How do you keep your leaders in town once they learn no more, right? I have not solved that. I can't, wish I could lie, and tell you that did. It's the age-old question. I mean, in Toledo, Ohio, where I'm from, they did a study years ago to show the people who were in my generation, this is like 15, 20 years ago, no, about 15, 16 years ago, that people who went on to college went to other cities. And it was true. Most of the people that I grew up with on my neighborhood, when they went to college, they're not on not in that neighborhood. They're not even in that region anymore because of the jobs. And in Orlando, with the young people that we work with, some have stayed, but the ones who've done really well, the ones who've gone to medical school and law school, they've gone to different parts of the country because they felt like there's more opportunity. And I think part of it too, and this is a lesson that I've learned. Part of it is that when you come from a family where you're just surviving, then you go to school, you come to Eastern, you come up to St. David's and it's nice dorms, and nice area, and it's better than growing up in the inner city of Orlando. Then you don't want to come back to where you came from. And if you come back and you're close to where you were, then your family, you feel bad because your family hasn't moved up. And so, people are calling you and that. So that's the challenge, and that's the thing that I'm challenged with, is how do we help the family grow while the children grow? Because mom, if it's a single mom, or mom and dad, they have to be increasing their skills while the kids are increasing their skills, because otherwise there will be a disconnect. The kids won't say that, but there will be a disconnect because there's a gap. You have the education gap, you have an income gap. And that's a tough one. I don't live in Toledo. I haven't lived in Toledo since I left home in high school, because it was nothing, really for me to do it. And I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing here. So that is an age-old question. But we do try to make it convenient for those young people who come back. My dream was to have the ministry led by young people who came through there. Now that's my dream. I don't know if that's God's dream. I would love to have some young men and some young women who come back to the area and actually lead. That would be my ultimate. So, other questions? Well, you all have been great. I hope
one time, artist. I have more time.
Oh,
Can I ask you a couple of questions?
Yes, sir.
I can let you go. Yes.
Well, I can go through and ask individually.
So let me push you more into the technical areas. So you picked Chester. I'm assuming you looked at various cities. Perhaps you picked it. Perhaps it picked you. The Holy Spirit obviously had a role in that. You're aware of the problems. So where do you even start? What kind of tools do you use? Who do you talk with? How do you go about even beginning? And that would be one aspect of it. Then you have wider, you have some Eastern. I mean, what about the outsiders, especially given the race dimensions? Is there a role for outsiders to play in terms of that kind of community stuff? So where do you start? How do you actually build this up? What kind of tools do you use? Drawing, and then what about the outside?
Great questions. Do I need to repeat that for the
I think
camera?
since I'm here, I think we're good.
Is he good?
It wouldn't hurt.
Okay.
Go with what Stan says, he's boss.
David's question was, where do you start in a city like Chester? You have, how did you choose that city as opposed to other cities? Am I correct in that one? And then with all of the complexities of the issues that exist in a city like Chester, where do you start to do your work?
And what do you do?
And what do you do? Excellent questions. Prayer. Prayer and prayer. Those are my first 3 steps. Because you don't...
I didn't tell him to say that, by the way.
Yes, he did. And I want my stipend. No, absolutely. You have to, when you're doing any type of work and you feel like you're called by God, you have to hear His call. I was overwhelmed by, initially when I applied, the president of Widener is a friend of mine. We worked together 20-something years ago. We've been friends for a long time. He's the one who told me about the fellowship. So that's why I knew about Chester. And I had a chance to look at Widener to come here 10 years ago. But I was overwhelmed after I found out I was accepted that this is a spiritual work. That God has something He wants to do, just like when He brought me to Frontline, even though it's not quote-unquote ministry, that God's Spirit is doing something in that city. And so starting with prayer is first. I think the other thing, that's what helped bring me to Chester. The other piece that helped me bring me to Chester was just connections. I'm from Toledo, which is an hour away from Detroit, so you could say Detroit, potentially, close to my hometown. I wanted to be in a situation where we had the best opportunity to succeed. Chester's small enough with 35,000 people that you really could incubate some things that you couldn't do in Detroit or Cleveland. No disrespect to Detroit, Cleveland, love you, love all my friends in Detroit, Cleveland, but they're huge and their issues are massive. Chester's small enough and has enough places like Eastern and universities that are close. You have Widener as an anchor institution. You have Crozier Medical Health System as an anchor. That you really could create some models that could be successful. So strategically, I looked at the resources and the size of the city. And then I thought about impact. Okay, given my expertise, what did the mayor of this city want to do versus the other mayors? The mayor of this city had 2 things he wanted to do. They wanted to create a grants office, where I have experience with. Well, I started out as a grant writer and I've raised money my whole career, so that's an area of expertise for me. The other thing was he wanted to organize his faith-based groups in the city to mobilize them around city issues. Economic development, strong families, promoting fatherhood, crime prevention through education, and building a healthy Chester. Well, I was one of the founding members of the Faith-Based Advisory Council in the state of Florida under Governor Bush. So I have expertise with developing that type of work around the state. So it seemed like it was a no-brainer because what he wanted to do is what I know how to do, and so it was a fit. Where do you start? Well, prayer, prayer, and prayer. Because when you come in, and I had this happen last week, I met a city council person who had not met me, and that person said, "Oh yeah, you're the grants person, and we need a lot of grants." I said, "It's a little bit more than that. It's a little bit more than just writing grants." And some of the people think that money is going to be the cure-all. Money is never the cure-all. It's the process, it's the system. So the office that I'm helping to develop, or the concept that I'm developing, that hopefully is a coming office, is an office of public and private partnership. How do you secure federal dollars, state dollars, as well as philanthropic and corporate dollars, and how do you manage that process? And how does that money align with the city's priorities? And what since I'm a burgeoning assessment person, saying those dollars, priorities, what are the outcomes? How much came in, and what were the city outcomes? So that the city can begin to be accountable and say, guess what? We brought in $1.5 million extra dollars. It's split among these priorities. Here's the, how many people were helped. And every year being able to say, this is why this process works. So that's my vision, that's the dream. And so I'm working within the city to begin training and developing, helping the city develop priorities, working with the mayor. That's one thing. The faith-based piece is like herding cats. And I know this is on tape. There are 100 churches in 4 square miles. But what we've said, and the mayor is in agreement with this, to put together a faith-based council, faith-based neighborhood council. He's going to choose 7 people. They will be the leaders of his Faith Action Network. And every church in the area will be involved, either on an informal level, or intermediate level, or very involved. So we don't want anybody to say, they didn't call me, because that's usually what happens. They didn't call me. There's room for everybody to be involved. And the fruit of that should be finding out those faith partners who are connected to those city priorities again, and then mobilizing them along those issues. There are already 9 neighborhoods in Chester where they've been doing listening sessions, and they're mobilizing those communities along community projects. We're going to come along in those projects, get the faith communities that are in those neighborhoods, and build their capacity, and use them as models for other neighborhoods to follow. So that's my methodology.
Strictly Christian, or is it interfaith?
Adam's question was, is it strictly Christian or interfaith? It's interfaith. Because they don't have, I don't think they have, they don't have Hindus, they don't have Jewish folk, but they do have, a Muslim contingency. And so I think it would be Muslim and Christian primarily in the city of Chester. Did I answer your question?
Outsiders.
The issue with outsiders. Well, outsiders, that's always a sticky issue. Because you have people that say, whether it's Chester or any city, we can solve the issue ourselves. We don't need anybody's help. The truth is, everybody needs somebody's help. The bottom line, I think from an outside standpoint, is that outsiders can, and I'm an outsider, we can help the people of the city of Chester help themselves. We can't do it for them. And so we can put together systems and processes and bring resources, but ultimately they have to do it themselves. And so my perspective, when I meet with some of the people, the community liaisons at the mayor's office, is that we're helping to develop capacity. Ultimately, the people in the city of Chester, they have to do it. We can't do it for them. I mean, otherwise we're becoming codependent. We're trying to do it for them, and then at some point we're going to leave. It might not be 2 years, it might be 10 years, it might be 15 years. But at some point, people will, decrease their commitment. The people who live in Chester, the people who are born and bred there, they have to own it. And people on the outside can bring resources and help develop capacity. What I'm trying to develop, you have to have structures by where you can develop the capacity. Because a lot of times, it's a question you asked when we initially talked, where do you start? There are a lot of people in places like Eastern that want to come into a city like Chester and help, but where do you start? And so I think part of what I'm doing as an SC2 fellow is to develop those, on-ramps where people can connect. And we've had a number of people say, heretofore we didn't know where we could start. So we're trying to create that so that beyond my tenure, there are ways for people to connect constructively without there being any apathy. Great questions.
We have 4 minutes left.
I got 4 minutes. Do we have to use our 4? Anything else anybody else wants to ask at all? Does anybody care at this point? I mean, you can just be honest with me. I'm drained. I'm tired of hearing about it. Oh, okay.
Deke first.
My name is Deke. I'm still developing a vision, and these people look at me, they don't know who I am. But
Deke's alumni graduated a year or so ago?
by 2011.
Welcome back, Deke.
Thank you. How do you manage working with councilman who I get this vision of him like blinking and there being dollar signs on his eyelids when he saw you.
Sounds like a Bugs Bunny commercial.
Yeah, exactly. I worked with somebody very similar circumstance in Rwanda. How do you manage that animal, and especially when they're maybe in a power up position?
Deke asked an excellent question of how do you manage people's expectations when their expectations are not in line with the goal.
Right.
I majored in journalism, so I just reinterpreted your question. What I always try to do, Deke, is to engage them into a further conversation. And that's what I told that council person, that let's talk, because I want to listen to where their heart is. It's fine, going back to that point, win-win. How can I make them win? And then when I can do that, they'll be successful. Let me give you a perfect example from my higher education experience. Right around the age of 27, I think it was, 27, 28, I became director of advancement for the medical school. The medical school at Wright State had 28 medical departments. And my job was to meet with all of those people and to develop a strategy for how we would raise money in line with the dean's priorities. And so when I met with every departmental chair, to a man and a woman, they all said they wanted to raise $1 million. I mean, I kid you not. Everybody wanted to raise $1 million. I don't know what the sum of $1 million meant, but I guess $1 million was a lot back then. And so I told each of them, we want to help you raise $1 million. I said, but for what? And that's where people, they stumbled. They didn't know what they wanted it for. And I said, every project that lines up with the dean's priorities, we'll do that. And we ended up bringing in millions of dollars. But it only ended up being like 4 departments because the other 24 weren't prepared. And so what I try to do is listen, engage as much as I can, and then try to bring the people along to get them to a point of readiness. So I think, it's a prayerful strategy, but you have to really listen to what they're really saying behind it, and really try to pull them in a direction where they are developing their own capacity. Because you're getting money for them, that's a flash in the pan. Whether it's Rwanda or whether it's Chester. Because when that money runs out, what happens? You're in the same situation if you haven't developed capacity. Who's going to get the next round? And I'm being just brutally honest. When people see government, they see, U.S., they think money. Think one of those federal grants. Or if people of color see white folk, they think money. This is a way for us to get money. It has to be about capacity. And it has to be about them developing. And then when people don't want to develop, you don't waste your time.